The drone industry is going through some chaotic times. A period of evolution where only the strong survive. 3D Robotics imploded after raising $120 million in venture funding. Parrot laid off 290 people, 35% of their drone workforce. Lily Robotics, which sold $34 million in pre-orders, is dead in the water after being sued for false advertising and was raided for criminal investigation. And there's another story to add to the mix. GoPro, the popular action camera maker, recently released their first drone called Karma, a small quadcopter which folds up for storage. Ryan Mack is a staff writer at Forbes and a previous guest on the podcast back in episode 19, where we broke down the crash of 3D Robotics. Ryan is doing some of the drone industry's most important investigative journalism, dutifully exposing the backstories of the most interesting drone company implosions. He's also covered one of the only interviews with DJI's CEO, Frank Wang, as well as Parrot CEO, Henri Seydoux, who in 2016 told Ryan that he predicted a bloody year ahead for drone companies. Henri must be a bit clairvoyant, as that was a self-fulfilling prophecy, no doubt. GoPro, as you know, is a very well-known public company, but one who is absolutely struggling to innovate beyond their core product. The story you're about to hear is based on Ryan Mack's article titled "The Sky is Falling for GoPro," which uncovers the hidden story behind the company's foray into drones, chronicling their history with this technology, how Karma's development started, and finally, releasing the drone and the ensuing tsunami which followed. GoPro releasing Karma was viewed as the would-be savior of the struggling company. But, as it turns out, making a drone at scale is a lot harder than it seems. Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith.
I should preface this with, I've had a long history in reporting on this company.
That's Ryan Mack. He's a reporter at Forbes.
I wrote a story in 2013, I believe, on the company right prior to its IPO, which happened in the summer of 2014. But we wrote this story on Nick Woodman, who's the CEO, and how he had developed this camera company and made it into this great success over the period of 10 years, something that was doubling its revenues year over year, if not tripling. It was profitable, had taken on very little investment, and just had been this great consumer electronics success story, such that Nick ended up being a billionaire after an investment by Foxconn, I think in December 2012. So I've had a long kind of examination of this company throughout the years, and this drone thing came around, and it's really just sunk the company. And I think that's where I kind of pick up the story. And so these videos start coming out online a couple days after this thing gets released. And I remember when I first saw a video, because I was just sitting here at my desk where we're at now, and it was just the most puzzling thing. I just couldn't understand why a problem like this hadn't been found early on in the testing. And then more and more videos started popping up, and then eventually the recall happened, and that just blew my mind. And so I thought there had to be a deeper story here beyond just the kind of day-to-day reporting on things getting recalled or the stock price falling, whatever. So that's kind of the genesis for this story.
GoPro's Karma drone was launched to the public in early November 2016. And, as Ryan described, just 6 days after, on November 8th, GoPro issued a worldwide recall on the drone, affecting a couple of thousand units. The reason for the recall? YouTube videos were popping up left and right, showing the Karma inexplicably falling out of the sky.
This guy, Brian Warholak, who I found on YouTube, put this video up, and he was a guy I talked to, and he said he was just so excited to get this drone. I think it was his first drone, and he was just so excited to go fly it, and he was like a little kid with the toys of 43-year-old guy. And he got out of work early one day and took the thing out and put it up in the air for about 2 minutes, and then it just fell out of the sky, and he thought it was like his fault. He went home, posted the video, and this is the video that I think most people have seen that care about this thing, and it went viral. I think it has like 300,000 views now.
Brian Warholak's video definitely wasn't the only one. His video, and others just like it, signaled the start of Karma's global recall. But let's back up a bit so we can understand why GoPro, an action camera company, desperately needed and essentially had to build this drone.
Like most consumer electronics companies, you can become outdated very quickly. Think of Flipcam, think of any TV maker, any laptop maker. Unless you're Apple, you're going to have a pretty difficult time innovating. And so GoPro realized this, I guess, really soon after it IPO'd. I mean, you can only go so long selling the same device over and over again, and you can't double revenue every year forever. I mean, it just gets impossible. And so this drone had been rumored for a long time. I believe the Wall Street Journal reported, I think November 2014 was the first time there was a drone rumored that they were going to go and build. But this rumor persisted throughout I think more than 12 months. I mean, and it was always something that Nick had played with and like toyed with the idea and like teased until they finally announced it. I think they unveiled it in September, right? 2016. So yeah, it's been kind of this goal to develop this new product and show that the company can go beyond cameras and these action cameras.
Okay, so in order to stay relevant, GoPro needed to do something drastic, something cool. Because no matter how much their billionaire CEO, Nick Woodman, thought that they were the most righteous company on the planet, their product line was stale, their stock prices were down, and he was ultimately responsible for answering to the shareholders.
And then I think he was at a code conference, May 2015, I think, that he announces on stage that they're finally going to do a drone. The rumors are true, kind of thing.
Do you guys all want GoPro to make a quadcopter? Oh, come on. Do you guys want GoPro to make a quadcopter? Okay. GoPro is making a quadcopter.
All right.
It's official.
All right. Okay. So
no,
what
you may think that I'm joking. No, we thought it'd be terrific here on Recode and with you to drop the news that we are officially developing a quadcopter.
Yes, I know. I just dragged that out of you.
And they aim for the first half of 2016. I think end of 2015 comes around and they're like, oh, we gotta push this back. So we're gonna push this back until summer of 2016. And then summer of 2016 is when they actually launched Karma.
And when talking about drones in 2016, 2017, and the foreseeable future, it's nearly mandatory that you mention the Chinese company DJI, the world's largest drone manufacturer, with more than 60% of global drone market share. Karma faced some very stiff competition from the get-go. Back in September 2016, for episode number 15 of Commercial Drones FM, I examined Karma's release and how just 1 week later, DJI would announce their most hotly anticipated drone ever, the Mavic Pro. With these two announcements being so close together, the hype meter was literally off the charts. However, all was not golden for either company at this time. Karma, which was announced 1 week before Mavic Pro, was actually expected to ship after the Mavic. DJI's announcement of the Mavic did go off like a smoke detector, and people from both camps, GoPro and DJI, were equally stoked. Two new, small, foldable quadcopters that promised the world were just released. But DJI's Mavic Pro faced manufacturing delays, and it was announced that pre-orders of the drone would wind up shipping after the Karma would hit shelves.
Karma going into it had an advantage, I feel like, because they released a bit earlier, and I believe DJI's production problems were out there ahead of the recall, if I recall correctly. So I think Karma was like well positioned had it not been for this recall. And a funny backstory in all this, I personally believe that there is, and I've seen kind of things that hint at this, but like DJI has always been worried about Karma and GoPro's drones. I mean, I think the Phantom 4 launch happened, was it March 2016? Around the original launch date for Karma. And then Karma was, of course, delayed. And so I always thought that the Phantom 4 was meant to preempt whatever GoPro was going to put out. So there's kind of always been this interesting back and forth.
Speaking of interesting back and forth, let's go back even further and introduce a new character to this story, Colin Gwynn. Back as far as 2010, Colin was CEO of then fledgling DJI North America. Here he is talking about one of their new gimbals for their Phantom 1 line of drones back in 2013.
The next product I'll show you is a gimbal that provides perfect stabilization for the GoPro Hero 3 camera. So it provides stabilization in the roll and pitch axis, and existing Phantom users will be able to upgrade to this gimbal. And then
listeners of this podcast are probably familiar with Colin, given his association. He has a new startup now, but previously of DJI, worked at 3DR. He's a well-known guy in the drone industry. But Colin Gwynn, who was then the head of DJI's North American division, DJI had just launched Phantom, and he was responsible for kind of going out there, marketing it, getting it known to an American consumer audience, given that it was a Chinese product, and the company had very little presence here in the United States. So they turned to Colin. He establishes an office in Austin, and he goes out and tries to market the hell out of this thing. And Colin is a great salesman, and I think people know that about him. And he won't take no for an answer. And so he goes to GoPro's parking lot, and their office is in San Mateo, California. And he waits for Woodman to like show up in the parking lot for work that day. Kind of ambushes him in the parking lot, whips out the drone, and just launches it right in front of him because he went. I didn't think Woodman would have given him the time of day had he not tried to do that. Like if it was a cold email or whatever, I don't think he would have gotten his attention. But he did by flying this thing. And the backstory there is Woodman loves new tech devices, and he also loves flying. And in my past reporting, I've found that he used to fly these gliders as a kid. It's kind of like one of his nerd type obsessions. And so when he sees this drone, he becomes immediately obsessed, immediately takes the controller and flies it and skips a couple of his meetings. And that's basically how DJI gets connected with GoPro in February 2013. And it was totally opposite of what it is today. DJI was an unknown Chinese company, and GoPro was on top of the world as the fastest growing consumer electronics company out there.
Here's Gwynn again from that same April 2013 video talking about the GoPro mounted in that DJI gimbal.
with our GoPro gimbal, we will actually do a composite video output. So you can connect any 5.8 gigahertz video downlink system to it and get the video feed coming out of the camera so that you can frame up your shots.
Well, the two companies kind of needed each other at the time, right? DJI didn't have a camera. They had this gimbal and they had this drone. They didn't have a camera, so people were putting these GoPros on it. And GoPro, always a fan of putting their cameras in new places for new perspectives, whether that's on like animals, like I've seen it on eagles, or on a race car, or on like skis or whatever, So Woodman sees this drone and sees a great opportunity. Like, hey, I can give people the ability to capture aerial shots. And so it seemed like a perfect match. Except that the two companies believed that they would they would be competitive in the future. And we had reported at the time, I did a story on Frank and DJI, and he told us in that story that they always had a vision of making cameras, and that they didn't like how GoPro was treating them in those meetings. They treated them as an OEM, an equipment manufacturer, and wanted to take more of the profit, even though it would be DJI manufacturing and designing the drones, and it would just have a GoPro label on it, is what the idea would be. And on the flip side, GoPro didn't know who they were dealing with. I mean, it was DJI, this is a DJI. They thought it was easy to make a drone, first of all, and they said, well, DJI, not many people know about you guys. We're on top of the world right now, and we have a great brand. You should be wanting to work with us. And so they butt heads, as I understand it, in talking to various people that were familiar with those meetings, which happened over the course of 12 months, but it just didn't go anywhere.
As previously mentioned, Ryan is one of the few Western journalists to ever interview DJI's elusive CEO, Frank Wang. In that interview from 2015, Ryan and Frank discussed the DJI GoPro relationship. Frank is quoted as saying, "They treated us like the original equipment manufacturers. The deal came out to roughly this. GoPro would make 2 points of profit and I would make 1 point. I didn't want it like that. I thought it should be, I make 2 points of profit and GoPro makes 1 point of profit. Because the product, from the beginning to the end, would have been mine."
It's interesting because imagine how stubborn you have to be, or how like a visionary or whatever you want to call these guys, to have like just the balls to kind of say like, I'm not going to work with this giant company. My company's going to be bigger than yours one day, and you just watch and just walk away from the table. Like that takes a lot of guts, and it makes for an amazing story. And so that's exactly what happened here. And so the company is just parted ways. Nothing ever happened. By January 2014, Colin was gone from DJI. So he had his own falling out, if you remember. There was a lawsuit involved. I think both sides eventually settled. Colin was out, so there's no longer this connecting kind of person to go back and forth between the two parties. And by the beginning of 2014, GoPro set on its way of trying to make its drone by itself. So
the plot thickens. Colin Gwynn leaves DJI amidst controversy, and shortly thereafter, in 2014, finds himself at North America's then most promising drone company, 3D Robotics, in Berkeley, California.
And 3D Robotics at this time was a high-flying U.S. drone startup, one of the best-funded drone startups. I mean, to date, I don't think anyone's outpaced them with the amount of funding they raised. And Colin appears at 3DR, and so he's now at 3DR, and he's like, "Hey, I'm at this new company now. Come work for us. Like, not work for us, but work with us." I mean, and GoPro was still a very large company at the time, planning for its IPO, looking for new ways to put its camera in different places, and so they started working together. 3DR did not make a camera, which was key, so like GoPro didn't see them as a competitor necessarily. And on top of that, GoPro allowed 3DR to use its branding. So a lot of Solo boxes had for use with GoPro or whatever, like touting the compatibility with between Solo and a GoPro camera.
So is that like I mean, you've been covering GoPro. Is that pretty rare? Like, I know I see the GoPro logo on a lot of different products, but I
think it was the first time GoPro sanctioned a third-party company to use its logo on its box.
So they were in. They were
so
really
the connections were
this.
deep, and obviously, like 3DR had access more so than anyone else has ever had.
A bit more backstory is appropriate here, and a quick note for those who are interested in more about these companies. In a previous episode of this podcast, number 19, Ryan joined me to discuss one of his earlier Forbes articles titled "The Crash of 3D Robotics, North America's Most Promising Drone Company." In that episode, Ryan and I discussed the background of the roller coaster saga that is 3D Robotics. How the company burned through nearly $100 million in funding, laid off 150 employees, and wound up where they are today. So give that episode a listen when you're done with this one if you're interested. But let's get back to GoPro. At this time in our story, all of the unfortunate aforementioned events at 3D Robotics were likely beginning to go on behind the scenes at the company. And during this exploratory relationship phase with 3D Robotics, GoPro still actually had every intention of making their own drone. And the discussions with 3D Robotics may have been just what they needed to start making bigger moves, because in June of 2014, Pablo Lima, who at the time was director of product management at 3D Robotics, was poached by GoPro. Pablo began his transition towards becoming director of aerial products as a key player in GoPro's efforts to build their own drone.
I think it was kind of a concurrent thing. I mean, while they were working with 3DR, they knew that they wanted to do their own thing, or at least they changed their strategy very quickly, because Pablo was hired long before Solo came out.
Solo is referring to 3D Robotics' own small drone that they developed in-house while Colin Gwynn was with the company. It is largely thought of as a massive commercial failure, and to many insiders, the Solo drone was the catalyst for the eventual crash of 3D Robotics.
So this kind of friendship between the two companies became this kind of almost uneasy competitiveness, if that's the right way to put it. I mean, like, how would you feel if you're working with someone and then they're also on the side working on something that could potentially be competitive with your main product? It's just not a good recipe, you know?
GoPro needed a team to build their drone. In addition to attracting Pablo from 3D Robotics, they needed to bring on others to help their dreams take off.
As they go beyond developing action cameras, they have to spend more on R&D. They have to hire people to develop this drone. It's an expensive venture. And if you look at the people that they're hiring, I did kind of deep searches on who was going to GoPro. I mean, these aren't people... First of all, the pool of people that know how to build a drone is very small. And so a lot of these people were at 3DR, and so they didn't necessarily go to 3DR to get them, but they were going to places like Switzerland, I think, was one place. A lot of universities, trying to find people with kind of basic knowledge, a lot of the people from the open source community, and extending offers to them to kind of create this team that could put together a drone.
With the task of building a drone from scratch ahead of them, R&D costs skyrocketed. New hires, new manufacturing partners, and lofty ambitions paved the road forward for GoPro's drone development hopes. This new internal push came at a rough time for the company. GoPro had just launched a tiny new action camera product called the Hero Session. Unfortunately, this new camera didn't meet sales expectations and had a negative effect on the company.
The problem with the Session was that a lot of people thought it was overpriced. And so even though it had worse video qualities and image capturing than, I think, the Hero 4 at the time, it was a more expensive product. And so no one bit on buying that, which is, I think, a huge issue for GoPro, because they took a huge markdown on that. They slashed the price on that, and they admitted to basically they said, we screwed up, we priced this wrong. And that kind of set the table for like the beginning of their issues. They're finally starting to realize like they just can't sell you can't just sell cameras and continue to be successful, and you can't have missteps with new products because it could lead to severe issues externally with the public and internally with morale.
These severe issues reared their heads when GoPro customers like Brian Warholak from the earlier Karma crash video received their Karma drones and began watching them plummet back to the earth with no explanation.
Someone told me, like, if an iPhone freezes or screws up or what have you, you can turn it off, you reset it, and then you're good to go. Or maybe Apple needs to push an update to you or whatever, and then you're good to go. If a drone fails, it falls out of the sky, maybe falls on something, destroys something, and then just breaks into pieces upon crash. So, like, a failure for a drone is so much worse than any other consumer electronic product. And so keeping that in mind, I don't know, it's just mind-boggling how it just wasn't caught.
And why wasn't it caught? At this point, it's unclear how much testing actually went on behind the scenes at GoPro HQ during development and prior to the launch of Karma. But as evidenced by the global recall of all Karma drones 6 days after launch, it's clear that the company somehow did not have any idea that this design oversight existed in the first place.
So the failure eventually was determined by GoPro's engineers, but it was the fact that there was a battery issue an issue with the battery compartment. And so the battery just wasn't secure in the compartment and would become disconnected from the drone itself, causing a complete loss of power. And so no power, just falls out of the sky. Then that begs the question, like, how did this get through the QA process in the first place? Like, why wasn't this found in the supposedly hundreds or whatever, how many test flights you do before you put this thing out. And folks told me like we were rushing this thing out. Like we had to be out, like had to be out before the holidays. And can't stress how important the holidays are for consumer electronics companies, that you need to have your products out and on the shelves for people to buy for Christmas and Hanukkah, and where you have to disclose your revenues and profits come next quarter, and you want to have a good showing.
Obviously, there's pressure on publicly traded companies. Revenue targets must be hit or the company's value suffers. And of course, it's easy to pick on big companies and make them seem silly or evil. But as drones continue to play bigger roles in our daily lives, their ubiquity may make it seem that any company with enough resources that puts their mind to it can release a line of custom drones. The reality is, it's really freaking hard to make a drone. And the truth is that in many ways, it's easier for one person, an individual like you or I, to make a drone than releasing them and making them at a global scale. So, did GoPro underestimate how easy it is for them to make a drone?
It's very safe to say that they underestimated what a lot of people that I talked to said. Just look at the deadlines that they tried to put on themselves, and look how many times the product was delayed. And look from the moment that it was rumored to the time it took to launch, and then the recall. I mean, look at those dates, and you can see that, like, this was not an easy venture for them, and there were plenty of missteps along the way.
I asked Ryan to give us his opinion on whether he thought it was the right move for GoPro to globally recall all the Karma drones, or if that was a bad decision on their part.
I mean, yeah, it was the right call to recall just a bad piece of hardware. And they had talked openly about this too. So I guess I give them credit, first of all, for recalling it, not kind of dallying on a recall, because one person put it to me this way, like 3DR and DJI have had numerous issues with flyaways and they've never recalled anything. But it takes some, I guess it's one way to spin it, I guess, but it takes guts to recall something, and so they did it very quickly.
A global recall of any new product is usually a bellwether of more bad things to come for a company. So there are repercussions that GoPro had to face after the launch failure of Karma.
So the recall happens early November. Yeah, that month, there are layoffs that happen. 15% of the workforce in the context of falling stock prices. There was downsizing. And so the largest group that was hit was GoPro's entertainment group. And so they basically said, we're not going to pursue these entertainment ventures, which was led by this guy named Tony Bates, who came from Skype and Microsoft. And he transitioned out into just a board role. Layoffs happened at the senior executive level. Fabrice Barbier, who was a SVP of consumer devices, is now gone. I believe, this is actually not in the story, but Adam Silver, another guy that was high up in the company responsible for a lot of partnerships, is now gone. And in GoPro's recent earnings call, they talked about kind of tightening the belt and making some cuts to that executive kind of C-suite level.
On March 15th, 2017, just 1 week before this podcast first aired, Ryan Mack released another story on GoPro, and things are looking continually worse. GoPro announced layoffs of another 270 employees in addition to the previous 200 from when this story was first recorded. That's 470 total layoffs in the past 5 months. So as a result of these layoffs, the stock was trading at its lowest point ever, down more than 40% in the last 12 months to under $7.50 per share.
The stock has been so bizarre since the company has gone public. So I'm in no position to give financial advice or predict where it's going to go. If this drone, however, doesn't see meaningful consumer pickup, I foresee it being really hard for GoPro in the next couple years, unless they have something up their sleeve or unless they figure out how to keep selling cameras. So it's an uphill battle for sure for Nick Woodman and GoPro.
The drone industry is extremely competitive right now. So what can companies who want to make drone hardware do to ensure that they don't fall into the same trap as GoPro? What makes a good drone company?
You have to be competitive with the top player, and that top player is DJI right now. But it's not just about being fast. It's about being smart with your money. So, for example, Lily, which raised $15 million and had $34 million in pre-order, wasn't smart with its money. Nor were they fast. There's a lot of things you have to be good at when developing a drone, and you can't fail at any of those, or DJI is going to take advantage of that.
So let's wrap this story up. GoPro recalled their Karma drone 6 days after release. The recall consisted of about 2,500 drones in total. They also missed the holiday sales season. But can 2,500 drone sales even begin to compete with the well-known Chinese gorilla, who shall not be named? The silver lining here for GoPro is that, contrary to what I initially had assumed, the company actually re-released Karma back into the wild as of February 1st, 2017.
I haven't seen it in the wild. I follow a couple Karma owner groups on Facebook, and people, the reaction has ranged from the person that's enthusiastically going to go reorder it to the person that says, "Hey, I'm gonna wait a couple months and see how this thing pans out," to the people that say, "I've already bought a Mavic. I don't have a need for Karma anymore." But the key point is that they've missed this holiday season, which was supposed to be kind of a formative period for the drone and kind of a great way to test if it had a place in the consumer market.
Before we cut off the mics, I asked Ryan if GoPro responded for comment on his story.
They did not, and that's actually one of the things I wish they had. I mean, you always want to get some comment from the other side, especially with things that were said about some of its employees and from some of its employees. So, yeah, it's maybe they will. Who knows? I'm excited to be on the podcast next when I write my next story. I just don't know what it's going to be about. If anyone has any tips about drone companies that are doing well or failing or whatever, feel free to email me.
GoPro calls the Karma more than a drone. For CEO Nick Woodman and GoPro shareholders, it definitely was more than that. It was a migraine on top of a headache on top of a massive hangover that just wouldn't go away. But now Karma is back on sale and in the skies, and I've seen some reviews that aren't completely bashing it. Right now it's on Amazon and costs $799, and believe it or not, it even has a perfect 5-star rating from 5 different reviewers who claim it's the best quadcopter that you can buy. Unfortunately, none of those reviews are verified purchases. So if Karma is so much more than a drone, then what is it? We'll have to just wait and see. Heads up. Massive, and I mean massive, props are due to Mr. Ryan Mack of Forbes for investigating drone industry stories like these and sharing them with us and the world. If you like what you heard and want more of this podcast, check out some of the previous episodes and then subscribe using your favorite podcast app to get all the future episodes as well. And to my podcast supporters on Patreon, this show continues because of you. Thank you for your enthusiasm, and if you're listening and want to help keep the show going as well, consider donating just $1 a month of support and gaining access to the private Commercial Drones FM Slack group, where myself and the others chat about all things drones and even have a new Drone Jobs channel. We'd love to have you there. To gain access to the private Commercial Drones FM Slack group, visit patreon.com/dronespodcast. That's patreon.com/dronespodcast. You can also find a link to become a podcast supporter, in addition to a bunch of other extra content, on the official Commercial Drones FM website at commercialdrones.fm. Thanks for listening, and fly safe.